wonderful to be able to do this interview with you. We are at key number 4, profession, and the two of you co-authored an article called Encourage Mediation and Arbitration Integration. So it would be great if you could briefly introduce yourself and say who wrote it, and then we will go into the why.
Sure. Okay, maybe I should start with that. And hello to everyone. Very happy to be here, Manon, and thank you for the opportunity. Well, the article was written by both Mark and myself, and we came at it from a slightly different perspective. I come at it as an in-house counsel. I was in-house counsel for several companies for nearly 30 years, always active in the international sphere. Very much involved in dispute resolution for these companies. So I think I see it very much from the perhaps business perspective. Since 2015, when I left Northrop Grumman as the Assistant General Counsel, I've really devoted my time to dispute resolution. So I act as a mediator, arbitrator, dispute boards. I'm also very active in trying to build a mediation in certain areas, such as investor-state mediation. So dispute resolution and dispute management is really at the core of what I'm currently doing. Mark?
Yeah, we have an awful lot in common, Manon, in terms of our interests. So you heard conflict management, and you heard investor-state dispute resolution, and those are areas that Wolf and I have both been engaged with for a long, long time. And so we share a lot of interest, and so it's easy for us to work together, and it's always a pleasure to work with my friend and colleague. I am a mediator, an arbitrator, a trainer of negotiators, mediators, and arbitrators, and a consultant to companies and states and courts and institutions for some time. I started with mediation really back in the 1980s. In the US, I was managing an office for the American Arbitration Association in Denver, Colorado. And Denver and Colorado were very early to the mediation process. Many of our colleagues will know of friends like Chris Moore and Mary Margaret Galt and ADR Associates, I think they were, or CDR Associates, I think they were called, in Boulder. We created something called the Colorado Council of Mediators and Mediation Organizations. And there were 8 of us meeting in a church basement. So we've come a long way. And I have to say most of my work early on was domestic, not international, though it started changing with NAFTA in the US and this accord between Canada and Mexico. And Denver was on this lovely north-south corridor, you know, between the countries. And so I took an interest in that. Moved to New York, ultimately to Dublin, Ireland, and started working for the AAA's international division out of Dublin, and then took up mediation, of course, again in Dublin and in Europe generally. So that was about 2001, and 2015 I left ICDR and have been associated since with ARB DB Chambers in London, but I also do independently do consulting and training and work with friends like Wolf.
So that means that we have a tremendous amount of experience with dispute resolution in the room. So all that combined power, what was the core message that you wanted to bring across with your article?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. If you're familiar with those knot signs, you know, with the circle around it and then the line through it. And so I would put silos, S-I-L-O-S, and I would put a line through it. We are, both of us, very much focused on the right process at the right time, on solutions, not a particular process, but solutions. And that's how we see, I think, collectively see mediation and arbitration as part of a fully integrated, complete and effective conflict management process. Wolf?
Yeah, I have to reiterate what Mark has just said. And I think this is really key, also reflecting on what we're currently going through in COVID-19 and what business has to deal with at the moment. There are so many legal issues and contractual issues that businesses currently have. And they can't afford the luxury of choosing to go down a particular route. What business really is looking for is a solution. It's looking for a resolution of these issues. And if you think about it, many of these agreements are not agreements that should be terminated, but rather they're agreements that have to be renegotiated. And what is the forum for that? Clearly not litigation, because that's not a forum that will allow you to renegotiate, rebaseline your relationships. And again, relationships are key here, because what business, of course, is able to trade on is relationships. Once those relationships are damaged or destroyed, it's very difficult to go back and rebuild them. And Mark and I have often talked to businesses about this, that really the sensible thing they should be doing is looking at the whole toolkit of dispute resolution. And really what that means is that it's, as they say, horses for courses. It depends on the particular situation and how that situation can be addressed. And over time, and again, just going back to my corporate practice, what we did is, with respect to any type of a conflict that we had, is that we tried to map it out, and we would have regular reviews with respect to a particular dispute to see where it was and what the off-ramps, as we called it, were for that particular dispute. Our aim was never to end up in court or at an arbitration hearing, despite the fact that those might be the processes that we had built in to our resolution clauses. Our aim was always to find a resolution, and a resolution that was effective, that was hopefully relatively speedy, and also cost effective, because we know that you can spend a lot of money on a dispute. And that's money that the business is losing with respect to investment, because the shareholders, the stakeholders, not just the shareholders, but the employees, the stakeholders of the company, are actually looking for the company to grow. And one of the worst investments, I think, that can be made is in a dispute, because it rarely actually brings you a reward at the end of the day, even if you're successful. The costs are enormous. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, only to echo virtually everything you've said. Couple of quick ones. As for time and cost, I remember working with a particular financial institution, and the general counsel introducing me and putting a big number up on the board and saying, "This is why we're here." Of course, it was their litigation budget, and I also I really like the concept, and I think it bears mentioning, because we say it a lot in our article about systematizing a process and really building this in. And it isn't just companies; it's policymakers. You know, it's states, it's courts. I heard a very interesting comment from a colleague in Switzerland yesterday who said that the Swiss courts are looking at something akin to what happened in the U.S. under the Biden bill, you know, where courts will have to come up with what are we doing by way of mediation, what are we doing by way of effective dispute resolution. So I think we are both of a mind that way. It's not enough to talk about it. You really have to pick it up and do something with it.
Mm-hmm. And so you're saying, okay, it's about systematizing processes. And does that mean that you are looking more at the combination of processes from arbitration and mediation? Or do you also see one neutral or maybe a group of neutrals changing heads in the same process? So how is your idea meant?
Yeah, maybe if I could just start with that, Mark. Again, you go back to the basic premise that you want a resolution. And so as far as a business is concerned, these silos that which are created, and very much they're created by, I would say, traditional legal practice, by the legal profession, by even the various arbitral institutions, because they try to put everything into nice little baskets and put a label on it. But going back to what I think the business wants is it's trying to find a way to deal with a current conflict which is damaging, and it's trying to deal with it as effectively as possible. So what does that actually mean? Well, so if you've got if you've mapped out a process which allows you then to explore different avenues to reach resolution, then in fact, you're going to be utilizing these different tools along the way. And so you're not going to simply say, I hand this over to the litigation lawyers, it's now litigation and we're going to end up in court, because that is very much the process that used to be the common process for companies to deal with their disputes. It's very interesting because companies generally will look at areas of risk and establish a method of dealing with that risk when it arises. But for whatever reason, the risk of conflict arising on projects or on contracts was not dealt with that way. It was simply handed over to the lawyers, and the lawyers then dealt with it the way lawyers traditionally deal with these issues. And I'm not being castigating lawyers here. That's simply what they're paid to do. But what we really have to do, and what a lot of companies have started to do and realize, as Mark said, because of the litigation cost at the end of the day, the legal spend, that there have to be methods that are built into dealing with the risk of conflict as well. And so I think that's the approach that we're suggesting be taken.
Yeah, that's all very good. I had a vision of when we started this conversation, Manon, and you sort of said we might touch on this subject, and my vision was of a hop on, hop off bus. And I'm thinking, if you could do that with process, wouldn't that be great? You'd say, oh, it's mediation time. And then you hop off, we need some pressure here. Let's have an arbitration hearing. Oops, time to get back into mediation. And I really think there is something to be said for what Wolf said, which is using the right process at the right time. I think it works. And what about one person handling, wearing both hats? That's your other question. And I do think a certain amount of that it does threaten some of our colleagues, which I think is unfortunate. But I think the best arbitrators actually some have wonderful process mediation skills, and they use it for a preliminary hearing. They use it when there's a information exchange dispute, because the best decision on those kinds of matters, the best process decisions, are made in concert with the parties. That's mediation, folks. And if you can pick that up, then you can also recognize when there are opportunities for people to visit with each other and perhaps even reach a settlement. So I guess I know, and I will speak for myself, I will say I'm less worried by a single person taking on the role of a mediator, and then as appropriate taking on the role of an arbitrator. What's important is consent, and someone who is in the role, who is smart enough and understands the process enough to know that, in arbitration you got facts, and in mediation you have arguments, and they're just different, and you need to know that.
So flexibility is the key word, actually. Whatever fits in for these parties in under these circumstances is the best that needs to be done. And I love the idea of the dispute resolution bus where you can hop on and hop off.
Sure. Why not?
So how do we get this dispute resolution bus really to get in the driver's seat, have a driver to drive it? So where should we start? Because in fact, in one hand, you are saying, you know, the demand is actually driving what is being offered in the market. So should we start with the users, or do dispute resolution professionals need to start doing? Governments? What would be your advice there?
Well, I think it is a combination of all, because at the end of the day, these are all stakeholders in the process. The user, and the user is always the most difficult one to get engaged in this, because users generally only get engaged once they have an issue. And that's often too late. But increasingly, I think sophisticated companies and others are starting to look at building this process into their own policies and procedures. And that's an important point, because as everything else within the company is dealt with by policies and procedures, there also have to be policies and procedures with respect to ADR. And Mark and I have worked on that before, and that's one of the areas that we're also consulting in, is providing companies with that kind of ADR support, so that they're already thinking about it before the issue arises, and they know how to deal with it when it arises. So that's a very important point. So users, as they become more sophisticated and able to understand that that's what's needed, will start to do that. So on the user side, that's just a message that has to go out to corporate counsel over and over again, that they then begin to understand that in order to reduce that legal spend and to proactively show that they're doing something within the company to do that, that they have to address that type of issue. And I think that's increasingly happening. I think on the institutional side, institutions are starting to get that too. They're not simply looking at arbitration and mediation and perhaps adjudication. They're also looking now at how you blend that, and you look at some of the more recent institutional rules, and there is more blending of that, so that, when you file a case, you also then already prepare for a mediation occurring perhaps simultaneously with the arbitration. But in any event, most institutions are forcing the parties to at least consider mediation in some respect. And so I think that's where institutions are helping a lot. And the legal profession is also, of course, understanding that there is a need, and particularly as users drive this and suggest that maybe there's an alternative method, then the legal profession also will pick up on it, because at the end of the day, the legal profession is a business, and they will do what their customer wants them to do. So as law firms become more sophisticated, and you see that, and I think Mark and I over our careers have seen law firms that have really gotten it and are actually very proactive in dealing with a whole range of toolkits or tools within the toolkit that can be utilized. So yeah, Mark, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, Wolf and I have both worked with companies who pick their outside counsel in part on their experience and expertise in ADR. And if you don't have it, you don't get the work. So that's an example of sort of demand driving, skills. In terms of a process, the process has become so much more sophisticated. An example of that was the old disputes clauses, whether within institutions or within companies. When you used to see it, you used to see either, first you saw either mediation or arbitration, you didn't see the two. Then when you see them together, you'd see them as part of a step clause that said, you must do this, you have 10 days. Then you finish this one, it's 10 days. Well, it's really very inflexible. It's the opposite, Manon, of what you were talking about. And what's to happen now is, as Wolf says, is we're seeing concurrent mediation and arbitration, so parties side by side can access the process they need at the right time, when they're prepared, when they know enough about the case, using a person with the right skills to help them, resolve their matter. So we're headed there, and it's happening at institutions, it's happening in companies. And I think policymakers can help by making the laws easier, by saying, we support this is good public policy, those kinds of things. So everybody has a stake.
Awesome. I love this, future vision, and I hope we are heading there in your dispute resolution, Bas. To round off our interview, is there anything that you would like to share, either something that you read when you were, or something that you found striking when you read any of the other keys or articles, or something else about your own article?
Well, perhaps if I could just say a development that's occurring right now, and I don't think at the time we wrote the article we'd really appreciated that, is that we're really moving into a virtual world, just as we're doing this here today. And that's going to stay with us. I mean, it doesn't matter what we go back to, what kind of state of normal we go back to. I think to a certain extent, this virtual world is where we are heading anyway, and this has just accelerated that. So with respect to dispute resolution, I think we can see this as an opportunity as well. It has drawbacks, and it clearly, things like Zoom fatigue are real, and you can't build up the same kind of rapport with people you don't know virtually this way. However, I think particularly with respect to early dispute or conflict management, it's a great tool because it allows parties to get together with a neutral in particular. Doesn't matter where they are across the world, particularly in international conflicts, and discuss the issue. It may not even be labeled a mediation. It could just be a facilitated negotiation. But that's exactly, I think, what people will start doing. And it's very cost effective. People don't have to get on an airplane. They don't have to spend a lot of time traveling or in hotels. And I think people are starting to realize that. And even if you start looking at online mediation, again, I think it's going to propel a lot of smaller companies that probably never even thought about mediation previously into recognizing this as a potential tool to deal with something quickly, effectively, cost effectively. So I really pick up on that theme.
Great. Mark, well, I couldn't agree more. It's bringing attraction. So what are your final thoughts, Mark?
Where we're going. But, one of the things that does occur to me, and I'm looking through the other articles, is we still have lots to learn. I love the comments about science, more science in mediation. I like the negotiation index tool. I thought that was a terrific idea. I love the the concept that we need to get better at understanding neuroscience and using that as mediators. That's all in the materials, and so we're still learning. We have a lot to learn. We have a long way to go, but we're on our way. We're going to get on that bus.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time and for your valuable insights and for sharing them here. Well, to be continued.